Hello, good evening, afternoon for some. This is Fovorobos and welcome to the Shining Icosahedron Great Order 3rd Season Tabletop RPGs and Education. We are with Zach Rez. Hello, Zach, how are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for accepting. So you guys know he's right now joining us from France, but where are you from?
I grew up in California
Okay.
and I immigrated to Canada in 2000.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I saw it somewhere on the website, something from Canada, and I was like, I thought he was from the US.
Yeah, I grew up there and I still visit friends and family there. I grew up in California. My parents still live in the same home I grew up in.
Wow.
And yeah, and my sisters live nearby in California as well. And yeah,
So you can join the whole family in one trip.
yes, that
So
is,
sorry.
yeah.
So I usually ask what our guests do for a living before we join or we move to the subject. However, I believe in this case we can leave that for later because, well, what you do for a living is the subject of this interview. So let's start with your background on tabletop RPGs and education.
Well, there's a lot of background. I started tabletop RPGs in about around 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And so tabletop RPGs were part of my childhood and part of my teenagehood and then part of my adulthood. And eventually, and even at the time, I remember just spending so much time learning how to play different RPGs, main ones being Dungeons and Dragons or Top Secret or Twilight 2000 or Gamma
Okay.
World and all sorts of RPGs that Star Wars RPG, all sorts of RPGs that came out in the 80s, basically. Toon is also a great RPG. And from there, I was thinking, my gosh, we spend so much time to learn these rules and to negotiate for meaning and to solve these puzzles and to work together. And I mean, even at the time, I was thinking, why couldn't we do something like this in school? And of course, school was not made in that way. But school has its own journey, and it's also about just getting into the journey of what your school is and what your story is. But the stories around RPGs and the ability to create different identities and try different things was always a deep influence on me and continued throughout my life.
Okay. So you mentioned the games you started with, and then could you tell us, or do you have a favorite one?
Well, I think that I think watching Dungeons and Dragons go from first edition to second edition to third edition, I mean, that's probably when I played it the most. And now I play and I teach it, but I teach 3.5 edition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't teach fifth edition. I feel that fifth edition is a great place for my students to learn that it exists and to try a different edition. I
Or
believe that 3.5 edition is pretty rules heavy, but also really interesting in mechanics. I feel like if you can play Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, you can pretty much play most any RPG or kind of jump into any RPG because you've really gotten a deep sense of how RPGs can work at a very deep level.
I agree, and I agree that fifth edition would be best to start. Um, However, and this is actually a question that we constantly have in the channel from the audience to our guests. That
Mhm.
is, uh, to our consideration, Dungeons and Dragons, it's complicated. You have a lot of elements that you have to consider. The character sheet is big. It's more than one. So and nothing against Dungeons and Dragons, but there are some games faster or easier. Why did you select Dungeons and Dragons?
That's a great question. And I absolutely love this distinction. When you're a teacher and you want to do something in the classroom, the idea is not to do it fast. So
Okay.
where in the industry, how fast you can make your character have it up and running and jump into a game is important for the
Mm-hmm.
industry. For us as teachers, it's the opposite. So for me, a character builds about 10 hours.
Okay.
regardless of what the RPG is. It's really nice to take 10 hours. I like to work in 4-hour bursts, or at least
Hmm.
2-hour bursts. And so I wrote this, the Teacher Gamer Handbook, where I outline how you do that 10 hours in about 12 or 13 phases. And, hour by hour, and there's lesson plans in there. But the whole idea really is to do something very complex, because with kids, this is what we want them to learn. We want them to learn complex systems. So that's what makes Dungeons and Dragons, in a sense, very rigorous. And when you can, there's so many other, so it's not that I think that Dungeons and Dragons is the greatest RPG. What it is it's a very strong RPG, and it's been through a number of editions that allow us, especially as scholars or academics, to then, or teacher trainers, or in teaching, or trying to think about what motivates and engages students, something that's so well laid out, like Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, is that you really get into, you can go outside of the system and create deeper backgrounds into the characters. I think that that's the key to really learning about the game world. So in the 10 hours of building a character, the most important thing to realize is that they're not only learning how to build the character from their own imagination. We don't even get to a character sheet for probably the first 5 hours. The first five
Okay.
hours is really kind of just taking blank paper and talking about what motivates the players, and what's safe for the players, and what they want to explore, and who they admire, to kind of go through their sense of what are characters. And once they kind of start declaring the types of people that they're interested in,
Being.
then it kind of goes with it, which is, well, is that's if you know that well, or you want to explore that, you can, but they can also explore whatever they want. But it's a really good place to start, where you get them to introspect around the internal qualities as a character that they like, or they embody. And so that's not so deeply in the handbooks of various RPGs. So that's why it's kind of more from a pedagogical stance, and from a social emotional standpoint, we're building the character together. Characters, they're all building characters. And then they start to understand more and more, as I introduce the rules, how the game world works. So it gives them a sense of world, they're kind of co-world building.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I really like that you take time, a lot of time on the character sheet. That is not only in games, that's usually not the case, but also in education. We've talked to a lot of people that work with education in games, and that's usually not a priority. And I was wondering why, for me, character creation would be basic, but so far it has been more to the actual role playing in the education, not so much the character. I guess it has to do that you work with children mostly. Am I correct?
I work with all ages, but I usually like to start at 11 plus. I think
Hmm.
that that's I think it's a really good place to start, because that's also a place where sense of humor uh, really emerges, and a lot of connections can be made. When you play Dungeons and Dragons, or you play any tabletop RPG, everybody's explains things in terms of what they look like, what they smell
Hmm.
like, what they sound like, what they feel like. And so we reference movies and TV shows and books and poems and songs and art. And so what's really beautiful is connecting with the students on a level around metaphor, and around sharing that we can reference so many different kinds of media, and let's say emotional content, that we can bring that to our experience, and teaching kids, or guiding players, whoever it is, to kind of feel that they can express themselves. Especially that comes through the DM or the GM, when they ask them, they ask, when the GM or the DM particularly makes a player describe something, or how they do something, is when it
Hmm.
starts to get really interesting.
Yeah. That is true. And before we can continue with more specifics on what exactly you do in your book and your experiences so far, because I saw the pictures and I want to know. Could you tell us a little bit about your background in education? Is it by like profession or passion or both?
Well, it really was not something I thought I was going to get into, actually. I was a music producer and I did a design bachelor's, always been interested in art, photography, video and film and sound. And I also, yeah, so I went and did, after university, I went and did a certification in sound engineering. And
Mhm.
so it really, I was really trying to help artists find their voice or find how to get what they wanted uh, artistically through a machine, and then how on the other side it would somewhat resemble or hopefully go beyond what they expected. Because a lot of times what happens is artists go in the studio and then the result they're disappointed with. So
Right. Yeah.
this was an interesting formation in me, or an understanding around how people work and how people try to create something. And in that process, and eventually in my life, I started a family when I moved to Montreal. And in 2002, deep after I'd already been, I started in 1997, a kind of daily meditation in the morning. And so this is a really important place for me to ground myself every day and to be kind of um, start my morning with something, not influenced by news or emails or phone calls or whatever it is. It's just to be kind of in my body and to find some kind of embodied moment.
Hmm.
When I was sitting very quietly, one day I got what I call a bubble, like something surfaced to the top, and it just was this word teacher. And I thought that was really interesting, and I kind of didn't really think much about it. But eventually, it actually resurfaced again for me, this kind of really strong word, teacher. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? I have a young baby, and I'd like to grow my family with my wife Sophie, and I wanted to figure out, how can I be part of their lives? And 15-hour studio days and long projects is really not a great place for me to start a commitment and foundation of my family. So this teacher bubble that came, it was really interesting because I thought, well, this is probably on page 26 of all the things I ever wanted to do. I never imagined myself to be a teacher, but it
Hmm.
would put me on the schedule with my kids, and that's interesting. And then I just went down in downtown Montreal, and there were two schools in English. There was Concordia University and there was McGill University. And I looked at both of them, and I started a certificate program at Concordia University. And I want to say that was 2003 or 2004, something along those lines. And within a year, I had my certification. But when I was asking and talking to the teachers, I was always wanting to know why they asked questions at certain points, or how they intended what they were asking to actually, deliver some kind of change in the cognizance of students. And so they were saying, you should probably do a master's or a PhD. And so eventually I ended up doing my master's at Concordia University. And I really liked the program there, and I felt at home, and I got to kind of start into education. But for me, education kind of also was a place where, what I learned about production, there was a kind of connection to you're trying with artists to make them um, get the best performance out of them. Like what do they want their art to say, or what do they want to aspire to? And I just realized it's the same with teachers. Teachers really are so dedicated to wanting to help people learn. And so I started really getting into the motivation of teachers and trying to figure out how you can get um, people in education to either come out of burnout or to reconnect with themselves and their passion for teaching. And so I really became involved in engagement and motivation. Those were the kind of key features and kind of what is an authentic curriculum. These were the things that I wanted to understand. Yeah, so that's kind of my foundation for basically becoming a teacher trainer and for becoming a person who really wanted to affect as many children as I can in the sense of how could they find a more authentic education? How could they be, how could their creativity and spontaneity be kind of protected, or there's a place for that to form, but at the same time, for them to kind of come into their own sort of sense of self. And of course, there's the academia, and that's the thing I kind of, let's say, fought against as a child or struggled with as a child. So then that's kind of where, you know, I figured out how to work within the academic scheme of education, but then I was also trying to figure out what are some different kind of alternatives that will change or give an opportunity for kids. So it wasn't even, I never really saw role playing games kind of came a little bit later. I was just trying to think more, how could you make school be more interesting and more motivating? And I feel like the main things that helped me with that actually was kind of like martial arts, mindfulness, and taking outward bound trips, taking wilderness trips. I found these to be some of the most deep experiences that I had as a child, and that privileged few get the experience to have that opportunity. And so for me, it was kind of like, how can I take all those things together? And I don't know. It's like it's a little by little process. You have to come very soberly, and you have to come with a lot of dedication, and you have to be able to show a lot of proof that things are changing, and that students are changing. And I think the main thing for me was just, how can you make children more confident and interested in their own learning?
Right. And at what point did you added the role playing games? I saw that you also work with board games. So what came first?
Oh, well, that's always a struggle. Like board games in schools, you can't use Monopoly to teach economics. And in fact, I'm quite not interested in Monopoly. And I think that in general, what's interesting is to introduce people to games that they don't know. So
Mhm.
instead of taking any of the games that most people played as kids, it's really interesting to go and find new games that challenge people, especially in for cooperative results. Those are very interesting, and it's kind of in that realization where I realized that cooperation result is what we want out of RPGs, right? So as an educator, I started thinking, that's interesting, and I wanted to figure more and more how to bridge
So sorry, I'm losing you for a second.
opportunities, opportunities for systemic thinking strategically. Where did you lose me?
When you said new games, actually I see you frozen right now. Okay, you're back. Perfect. Yeah, when you said new things and then um, yeah, you're back. Okay.
Okay, I'm just trying to go back where I was.
Yeah, showing new things to people and
Yeah, new games. Instead of playing chess and checkers and Monopoly and Life and Sorry and Connect Four and basic card games, the idea is to find what are games that have different challenges, and have opportunity to become collaborative. And so collaborative results is kind of at the heart of RPGs.
all right. Yeah, that is true. That makes sense.
So that became kind of a place of really, I started to do it in Montreal. I brought mindfulness into my adult English class or students who were adults who were finishing their high school diplomas, more and more I was bringing in elements of RPGs, but not playing RPGs in the school. And it was actually in green school. So I had built a curriculum around it, what I wanted to do. And then when I moved to Bali in 2014, it was there with some students where the school had some students that they wanted, maybe let's say behaviorally, they wanted to give them something different. They wanted to give them something new because they had done a lot of the things that the school had to offer. And there was this opportunity where they said, does anybody want to work with these, this particular set of students? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I said, what do you want me to do with them? Because I'm interested in just trying to figure out what motivates people, and what is it about this set of students that's demotivated. I wanted to figure out, what could we do? And they were like, we don't mind. What do you think would be good? And I said, and it just came in a flash, like, do you mind if I teach them how to play Dungeons and Dragons? And this isn't a teacher's meeting, and they're like, we don't care, like, go for it. And they really gave me this opening. And so this kind of curriculum I had built around it, and I hadn't really even thought about it. It just all kind of connected, because I was thinking it's a totally different kind of group of students that I was working with than I was working with in Montreal. And so I just said, okay. And it was very exciting, because walking through the halls of school, what we call the bamboo hallways there, because it's kind of an open concept nature school. I would stop with each one of these different students, and I'd say, hey, what do you think about if we could play Dungeons and Dragons on these Wednesday morning classes? They're 4-hour classes called Jalan Jalan. And I said, what do you think if we played Dungeons and Dragons? I said, and they're like, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. And I said, well, I can't be certain that it's actually going to happen, but maybe I'll be able to. And they were like, yeah, I'd do it. And so I just stopped with each student and kind of had that little thing. And I said, don't count on it, but it could happen. And then sure enough, when we kind of pitched our classes, that's what the teachers would do there. They would pitch their classes, and the class was full. And that's when I started really teaching it term by term. So it's almost been 10 years since I started teaching it in schools.
Wow. And so when you started mentioning it, they already knew what Dungeons and Dragons was.
I think it was more like a thing that they heard of, or maybe they saw a little, it's kind of a little bit it's around the time of memes just sort of getting going. I think it was more, it's the kind of thing that you heard about, or that you knew about, but hadn't played because no one had the books, or no one, knew how to do it. But these are the kind of things that I carry with me kind of, all the time. Or, I always have my main books and boxes and boxes. I just went back to Montreal last year, and I have some friends, thanks to them, who have stored my boxes, and I have like 4 or 5 boxes of just RPGs.
Nice.
That I've collected over all these decades. And yeah, so it's I always have at least basic books with me. And then I realized, that would happen. And in any way, the whole point was, how am I going to teach it? And as the curriculum that I had wrote was, let's just start out with what they're motivated by, and who do they like, and who do they admire, and what qualities do they admire. And then when you have a whole list of different qualities, and you have a whole list of different, let's say, characters or people, real people from history, and then actual characters from different franchises, once you have all those things kind of on a board, and then you start to say, well, which type of people are these that are paladins? So then
Okay.
paladin is any person who, of course, is given power from their god, or some kind of a divine power, or they have such a mission that they need to accomplish. They become a holy warrior. So that's anywhere from Wonder Woman to Thor to Captain America to, of course, the classics like King Arthur or Sir Gawain or And so you can look through all these different franchises and you can see, you know, who these people are. And then, you know, you look at other qualities and start to see, you know, well, these are rogue classes, and your rogue can be, you know, James Bond, but your rogue can also be Captain Jack Sparrow. And so you have different kind of rogue classes and qualities. And you also have Han Solo, and you know, and then you have to have, there's certain characters that you end up kind of breaking up and trying to describe because they're kind of multi-class. You
Yeah.
know, somebody like Indiana Jones is a total multi-class character. You could call him a paladin, probably. He definitely has some cleric, and but at the same time, he has a bunch of other skills, and so you know, it's interesting to just go into that world of description. And we've never even opened a book. You know, the book hasn't even been opened yet. I think that's the main thing I was teaching in general with teacher training with any teachers is, how do you start with the book closed
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
have a conversation with your students and see what they know, and get them to actually fill out boards full of information about what they know and what they think about and how they think about things. And then when you're trying to like bring them into a system, whether the system is chemistry, or the
Mhm.
system is Spanish, or the system is you know, like how history is organized, or you know, critical race theory, or whatever it is that you're trying to get somebody to learn or learn about or guide them to learn about. It's about, you know, having a conversation with them and seeing who they are and what do they know. And then you can also draw on their experiences, and they can draw on their experiences, and then they also feel more free to talk about those things at all through the class time, so that you kind of giving them this opening and this freedom to like, all of what you're bringing is important, and it helps us all learn as we kind of take any particular object that somebody gives us, and we can turn it around and look at it in a lot of different perspectives.
That is so cool. I know that myself, I would have appreciated having that chance when I was in school, especially with subjects that I struggled with. And since this has been a subject for the whole third season and fifth season for the Spanish interviews, I know a lot of people on our audience agree with that, that people that do this are uh, putting an option for now the current students to do things that, or to learn easily, or maybe not easily, but because the subjects are the same, but with a different motivation. Now, I
Mm.
do understand the logic behind using a game, any game, for to make something more fun or interesting for people, for students. And when you mention the examples on the type of character, like a paladin, a rogue, all that, I understand also how that might help, for example, history, like getting to understand the logic behind history, or even, I don't know, literature, understanding the how to create a person, how to understand the person. But do you use these games for other subjects? I am especially interested in like science, exact science, like math or biology, all those things. How do you mix them up, if you do?
A great question. And yes, you do. From the literary side, you know, you can use archetypes, the hero's journey, anthropology, history. I mean, these are all stories. All the stories have to be cogent, right? Even in an RPG, when you world build, it has to be believable inside of the rules that you create in the world, right? And anytime something goes outside of that, somebody's going to be like, hey, that's not fair, or that doesn't make sense, or, you know, so we all have to make sense. So we have to create a certain kind of language, lexicon, and we also have to establish, uh, you know, where at what point everything makes sense. And there has to be an imagine. The thing that's nice about playing RPGs is that you're giving away to your imagination. So as long as like as long as the system holds and people feel the system holds, then it makes sense. And people really enjoy to be inside of a certain frame and to get creative in that frame. But to go further with your question, yes, there's so many teachable opportunities to use science, to use other languages, and just quick examples. to use other languages, you can code things. You could give somebody let's say a magic ring, and on the interior of the magic ring, there's a let's say a puzzle, there's a question, or there's something that they have to figure out. But you put it in whatever the language is of another class that's being taught there. So if you're learning Cantonese, you could put that actual riddle in Cantonese, and that's it. You just give it to them, and now they have to solve it. So that's one way. And then with science and with math, I mean, one of the key features is, if you just play, you play. But if you build terrain, if you do foam sword fighting, if you paint figures, if you make costumes, and anything larger that keeps going more and more into LARPing, live action role playing,
Yeah.
then all those things are important, because no matter what project you do, you're going to end up measuring, you're going to end up scaling, and you're going to end up budgeting. At least, at least those three things are going to happen no matter what. So yeah, I'd say if you stay just inside of playing, you're more on the lines of literature, history, media. You're kind of just working with that. But the minute you start to actually do hands-on projects, you now change it into a different dimension, where you're going to have to learn more about probability. You're going to have to learn more about shapes and geometry. You're going to have to learn more about algorithms. All those things are going to come, and that's where, like, project-based learning, that's where you're now merging and marrying social emotional learning, SEL, with project-based learning. Uh, and so SEL and PBL, these are like the core ways I've found to help people learn life skills through RPGs.
Oh, that is amazing. And I want to mention a couple of comments that we have in the chat, because well, first of all, I agree. And second of all, they are for you. So for Heather, he is the founder of the studio. He's saying, thank you for being that caring with your students. And I completely agree. He also agrees that he would have loved to have that kind of class. And then he's one of our most loyal cultists. He's saying that's an awesome point of view with the last thing that you mentioned. And again, I agree. I I do have a question, because I saw that you go to different places, or at least that's what I understood with the pictures. And then I also saw that you have like specific centers or organizations that you work with. So are you like let's say a freelancer, a professor that goes to a specific class or a specific school, and they say, hey, these kids are having issues, and you go and help them? Or do you work and do this at a specific location in general, and then you have additional projects?
So great question. So I have kind of laboratory, like, or what I would say is, where I actually teach and work, and that's changed over different years. I've worked at about 4 different schools or school groups. You froze, so I just want to make sure you can still hear me before I continue.
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you hear me the whole time?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so, and then I also work, so Teacher Gamer is, largely around what I would call the teacher gamer revolution, which is just something I wish for everybody. I wish that all kids have the opportunity to work with teacher gamers. There are teacher gamers out there before me, during and after, I'm sure. The teacher gamer revolution is really just kind of how do we promote the opportunity to safely and respectfully and with trust use RPGs in schools in some way. And in some cases, that's a lot of after school. Are you still with me?
Yes, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
still froze for you.
Sorry?
Am I still froze for you?
Sometimes you're freezing, but if you're
Oh,
hearing what I'm saying, that's okay.
okay. Yeah, I
Um,
can hear you.
and so sometimes it's just for after school programs. Sometimes people are able to actually bring them into, let's say, leadership or mindfulness programs, or maybe theater programs, or
Mhm.
they just they find a way to people are finding more and more ways to bring RPGs into classrooms through LARPing, through summer camps. So there's a lot of opportunities to go there. And then so Teacher Gamer Handbook was kind of my way of saying, this is kind of how I see it. Here's the philosophy around it. Here's my background in education and personally, and just trying to connect with and just trying to put something out there to say this is one person's way of seeing it and looking at it. And around that, I built a 36 life skills kind of system, and that's some basic skills and some more advanced skills. And from that, I just became, and I've been talking with people multiple years about starting a school, and at least I felt like I'm really comfortable with literature, media, philosophy, political science, and games. And so that's, a really strong place for me. But I also feel like I have a background my main background in teacher training and looking at authentic curricula. I think, there's a way to put RPGs in schools, no matter what your core curricula is. But then the exploration is, could you do something more? And I think some schools are trying that as well, where they put it at the center of the curriculum. I don't know. I mean, the verdict's not out, but I feel like it's important to give students a really well-rounded life skills experience. And I feel like, from my experiences, giving them at least 1, if not 2 days of role-playing games and everything around that, again, that's around LARPing or building or enterprise or even food, and producing. There's also different things that you can do to enhance your RPG or to create your own RPG.
That is true. And speaking of other RPGs, have you used any other systems besides Dungeons and Dragons? I understand that is your go-to, and I understand why, but have you tried others for this?
Great question. So yes, I've used Star Wars role-playing game, and I like the D6 system, just because I find it so different, and also that you're moving away from the D20 system that's Dungeons and Dragons. Really loved the who is it? It's Frontier Fantasy Frontier. Wait, what's it called? Anyway, the D6 system by Star Wars. But that's actually really complex because, of course, not everybody likes Star Wars. And so you have some people who are so into Star Wars, and then so many people who are like, well, I could care less. But again, where you build it first about talking about aliens and alien races, and you don't go right into Star Wars again. And with the book closed, you start by making you start developing characters for a space RPG, which is very amazing and freeing. It's not until you put the frame in anything that all of a sudden it starts to limit, right? So no matter what system of rules you're going to put in, it starts to embed a frame. And again, like life, I think that's the metaphor of life. If you live inside the frame and you don't know the frame is there, then you're in one kind of world. If you realize the frame is there and you work within the frame, but you also find ways to break the rules and move out of the frame and innovate, then that's another way of looking at it. To further answer your question, the only other RPGs that I've used is actually ones that were created by the students. Otherwise, in shorter exercises, we learn to play games. Usually we learn to play 1 game a week. And in that game, we try to RPGify it. That's what I call taking a regular tabletop game whose purpose generally is to win or to score points, and to all of a sudden make it interesting by, before starting to play the game, or as you set up the game, or you describe how the game is working, you again begin with the background of each. So you kind of ask people to come up with a background based on whatever that game is. And so you start to RPGify it. You start to make it into a role-playing game, which becomes way more interesting and more funny. Then you also learn the system of how to play the game. But the focus on winning and losing, especially in a competitive game, disappears because it's more fun about keeping the story going that you've created as you RPGify a tabletop game.
That is true, and that's a good idea. They are mentioning on the chat if you were referring to Frontierland, maybe?
No, is it Final Fantasy? No, it's not Final Fantasy. It's Final Frontier. Maybe it's Frontier Games. I was just trying to remember the name of the or West. No, it was West End Games, and then it got taken into D20 system by Frontier Games, I think, something like that. But then no, the original one was West End Games for the Star Wars role playing game.
Okay, okay. And you mentioned the games that the students make. Do you mean they create stories or they create like systems or?
We make an RPG. Yeah, we
Okay.
make a full scale RPG. So generally, like when I do a project like of creating an RPG, you know, we would take 16 to 32 weeks to make an RPG.
Yeah, that's like a good time.
Yeah, it's a whole class, like, because you start at the beginning, you know, like, what do you want in the game? What mechanics do you like? What mechanics don't you like? You really have to go into games. Like, you have to go into what is the history of games? Where do games come from? What are the ways in which you can, you know, decide chance? So then you learn about probability and chance, and you learn about um, what are going to be different ways that you settle a dispute. What are different ways that you determine how time works, or determine what a, you know, whatever the being is. We imagine that these are conscious beings in a role-playing game, so to speak. So if it's a conscious being, you know, what kind of attributes are important to them? And of course, we have the 6 basic ones of Dungeons and Dragons. And I always, when I was a kid, I created, or I was, you know, part of people talking about perception as being kind of a 7th kind of, in D&D second edition. It felt like the attribute perception would have been worthy. But eventually for D&D third edition, they just kind of put perception inside of wisdom. And I think it works. I think it ended up working there. But I think in general, you know, when you come up with an RPG system and you talk to kids or players or, you know, whoever, and you say, you know, how is the human being made up? And especially if they've never played any games, it's great because they're going to talk about all sorts of different kinds of things. You know, they're going to say spirituality, they're going to say agility, they're going to say cooperation. I mean, anything that they can put in their mind to being a kind of skill. And then you either have to figure out how to make that as a pillar in the game, or you have to get them to realize, or they have to realize collectively that, you know, all the stuff that they brainstorm, you're going to have to decide what actually is going to make it into the system of the game. And so it's not about knowing what the game is going to be. It's really about, you know, with each individual class of students, they're going to come up with something different, and they're going to want different things. And that's, of course, where you get to talk about all sorts of literature and media thematics, because then you end up talking about, you know, the setting, which is both, you know, time and place, and when is it, when was it, when will it be, or time travel is obviously something that people also try to figure out. But then if you try to do time travel, you're going to be dealing with a whole new set of, you know, science.
Yeah.
And actually, I wanted to like roll back really quick and say one of the things that interestingly comes out of playing RPGs scientifically is that when somebody gets hurt, and, you know, somebody's trying to help somebody who gets hurt in the game, and like, what does that look like? And you really quickly learn to understand what people understand about first aid, or being safe, or how to either, I mean, heal, but like what healing takes, and how extreme, or, you know, just depends on the agreement that you make with the students in terms of like how graphic you would want to become.
Right.
So it's great to use something like the anatomy coloring book if you want to get that graphic, so that if somebody has a wound to the arm, or to the hand, you could look something up and go, okay, where in the hand? And you can even make a chart about, you know, what actually got injured, what the injury is, and then what are the, what is the actual reality of your ability to use things with your hands, for example.
Mhm. That is amazing. And I want to refer to the chat one more time. They're saying that it is awesome what you do. And again, thank you for doing this for your students. Also, basing on the last comment in the chat, I would like to share with you the basic attributes that we use in our systems, at least the two that we are working with right now. And
Right.
we have 4 basic abilities, or we call them talents. That is constitution, celerity, intellect, and instinct. And those 4 can have their own like ramifications that are more specific, like constitution strength, or being able to endure or to tolerate certain things. Now, and each of those have their like own list that you can put from your own imagination, or you can have the list as reference. Just if that helps in any other games that you play.
No, it's great. Exactly. So I'm sure in order to get there, like you had to negotiate and agree that it works. And so to me, that's like the gold, really. And that's so much of like when you make an RPG, it's the process. And when you play the RPG, it's also the process. And I guess it's a little bit the idea, one person makes a violin and another person plays the violin, and then the person who plays the violin gives feedback to the maker of the violin. But you could also be a maker and a player, and then you also the listener, right? The listener to. I think now we have this whole world of listening to other people play RPGs, and that's a whole other level of feedback as well.
That is true. I agree completely. And yes, we do have a lot of testing, and it is important to understand like the rules, the logic, understand the playing, and watching others play will give you a different point of view. Now we are reaching the hour that we agreed. I would like to ask you one more question, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
All right. So I understand based on what I've seen on your posts and what we've talked for this all this time that it has been a successful project of yours. My question is, why do you think using tabletop RPGs help or work?
Why does it work? Well, I guess again, I will go back foundationally to look at what the problem is. The problem is that by the time most kids are 14, in a regular school environment that's siloed, where they go to the various different rooms to study the various different subjects, um, at least even my experience between 11 to 14, you start to realize like this isn't going to stop. We're kind of just getting started on siloed academia that's going to go on for years, all the way through, whatever my dream is. If I say, hey, I want to be a veterinarian, everybody's like, oh, wow, okay. So you're going to be in school for, you're a 14-year-old saying that, and they're saying, well, you'll be in high school for another 4 years, and then you'll probably have to do at least another 6 years. And so when you think about like, what is school? If the definition of school to you is just kind of this rigmarole schedule where you just do the same thing over and over, I think that becomes uh, stressful. And if you're and also if you're brought up in a competitive environment, in some places you get your scores and it's very private and personal. In other places, they just put your scores on the wall and they just say you did it or you didn't, and everybody knows. I think what's important is um, it works because, well, especially, so I'm working with the Biophilic Education Alliance. It's a group that I've formed with my partners, Rosina Durelli and Farhan Mir. And we have we believe that, again, a little bit like Teacher Gamer Revolution, the Biophilic Education Alliance is like any schools who look at bringing together a love for life and a love for being on this planet and growing and a love for learning and how to find all the resources that one needs to feel comfortable learning and feeling good about learning. This has been our focus, and our own in-house brand of that is called the Da Vinci Life Skills. And so the Da Vinci Life Skills is looking at project-based learning and social emotional learning, um, where we see the effect it's having on kids. And the effect, to answer your question, is them becoming more and more confident. What we're really trying to help kids attain or achieve is confidence. By the time they're 14, are they just starting in with feeling stressed, or are they feeling like they've learned a bunch of skills? And so we work on projects. That's the idea, is that we work on really long-term projects. And our idea is that over 4 years, you do 40 different projects, 16 weeks per project. You do 5 weeks a term, 5 weeks, or sorry, 5 weeks, 5 projects a semester, excuse me. So yeah, over 4 years, you're doing 10 projects a year, you're doing 40 projects. And we have personal exploration projects, we have enterprise projects, we have production, we have food, and we have multiverse games. And in that experience, we're seeing success. And we've been piloting it. So we piloted it at Empathy School in Bali. We've also piloted it at Chatmore International School, which is part of the Council of British International Schools, or COBIS, which is in Bermuda. And then we have a hub that's in Cambridge in the UK, and various different, right now we're in this place where we're trying to find how we can show assessment of what kids are learning through portfolios, and also through their own, sense of success and their own ability to assess themselves. A big part of it for us is how you assess your own learning. What is your experience learning? It's not about how I think you're learning or how well I think you're learning, but it's about how a student realizes for themselves what helps them learn and what's a distraction from their learning. And there are lots of different ways to learn, and a combination of ways to learn can happen through project-based learning, and it can definitely happen through multiverse games and RPGs in schools.
Wow, that's thank you. That's amazing. And I am very happy to hear that your project and this that you're doing, you're not doing it alone. That is something that constantly happens, right? Someone says, "Hey, this is a good idea," and they start working on it, and then it's really hard to convince others to let go of the traditional ways and use others. And I'm really happy that you do have people working with you and sharing this project. And well, it sounds very big. So I'm really happy about that. And I am very happy that you agreed to this interview. We are reaching the end of the interview. But before we go to the last part, well, again, thank you so much, not only for accepting, but for the job that you're doing, for the adding all this to this life of the students. I know that again, as a student myself, I wish I had this kind of teaching, especially when you talk about confidence. That's true. A lot of times confidence is not something that in general society puts like enough importance or attention, and that really affects in the future, right? Before I go to the last section, that is some announcements and all that for next week, I would like to give you some time if you want to tell us something like a new project, a way that we can support you, anything you would like to say to the audience. This is your free time.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing light to this subject. It's so important. It's so clearly and evidently um, things that people have been trying. People have been trying for years and decades and generations to innovate, and education is no different. Is to find innovation and opportunity to learn about how things are made, how we can solve things, or that we can approach problems, and what are the different ways to approach a problem, and also to be aware of problems, and then also to look at how when we strive to solve a problem, we arrive in failure, we arrive in the unknown. We arrive in a place where we also maybe lose ourselves, or we're not sure. And I think this space for ambiguity, actually, to quote Simone de Beauvoir, like this place of ambiguity, we always have this tendency to want to know something for sure, or put something in a box, or to label something, or decide something. And it's also the process of the child who's between 11 and, I mean, whatever, 11 to 18. It's all this time where so much change is happening. And as educators, we need to facilitate that space for change. We need to allow that to be. We need to let kids ask questions, and we have to help them in a Socratic way, not just to answer their questions, but to answer their question with a question, or give them a way to kind of maybe think about things in a different way by asking them an inspired question based on their inspired question. So really, it's a kind of search. It's a co-learning experience, and allowing kids to co-direct their learning, and or guide them in that is so critical. Yeah, well, the Teacher Gamer Handbook, it's out there. There's also the Teacher Gamer screen. I think I have one with me. I have one that I made, but it's an 8-panel screen that I'll hold up here. But I love the old screens of the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they still make them. But this is part of the Teacher Gamer Handbook. But the screen is out there, and what happened is that in the book there were so many different kind of how do you say that, like tables that we ended up making. I made myself, but then some students made them, and
Oh,
so
nice.
it's kind of a compilation of all those things. And so it's a quite useful screen. I've been really loving that the students, that's another thing too that we're going to actually be doing in the fall of this year, is that everybody's going to make their own screen. I think that's a fantastic project. It's such a great production, and the production value of something like that is like, how much can you pack it full of tables that people want, or tables that people would use, versus what I want to see printed on that thing. Yeah, that, and get in touch if you're listening to this and you're interested in figuring out how to bring RPGs to schools. We're doing teacher training for mentors at Da Vinci Life Skills. We're doing teacher training also for Teacher Gamer. I don't believe, just like I don't think that you can become a chemistry teacher, in a weekend. I don't think that you can become a Teacher Gamer overnight. There's so much to consider, both as a teacher and as a gamer, and kind of merging those together. And it's not supposed to be a cottage industry. It's just more like, this is one way to do it. This is how I've kind of imagined it can be done, but there's so many ways about going about any project, or going about any puzzle. These are just kind of the things that I've unearthed in education about myself, in political philosophy, and then what I've learned through games and exploring identity, and all the things that I felt like it gave me great benefit in my life. Again, it's not about somebody playing my character, but about somebody playing their character and finding out what really makes them tick. And then it's for the dungeon master, it's for the teacher to figure out how to open that space, open that world for exploration, where everybody feels like they can be part of the creation of it.
True. I agree. Well, again, thank you so much for coming, for sharing this with us, and for doing it. Again, it's not that often. As you say, it's a little bit more common now, and probably in a few years you will be able to see this in a lot of other places, hopefully. But well, it's not like that right now, and I do want to thank you as a person that is pushing this kind of education techniques or well, it's not only education, like growth, personal growth form of doing things. We have here at the studio symbolic way to saying thank you for accepting, for coming and joining us here with Occultist and sharing what you do. It's an acknowledgement that people will be able to see on the screen soon, and then I will send to you later on. Again, thank you so much for accepting and for joining and giving us this time. I will go real quick to some announcements of the channel. And I'll switch to Spanish very quick. Recuerden que la próxima semana tenemos igualmente sábado y domingo de la Orden del Icosaedro Fulgurante y Shining Icosaedron Great Order, y estén atentos de el inicio de la siguiente temporada de Eterno y cualquier otra cosa que vamos a estar publicando pronto. Thank you so much. Thank you to the cultists for being here, and may your checks be always critical.